In history, there are certain characters who seem to be able to bend fate around them, who can seize all power, despite coming from more humble beginnings. Why are these people often seen as monsters? Why is it that history attempts to portray them as something other than a product of their time and circumstance? And when our new histories are written about those today who seem determined to wrest power from the status quo, will they too be described as monsters and barbarians? All this and more on today's edition of The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a Liberty Nation production. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Welcome to The Rabbit Hole. The power of the press to inform and persuade appears as though it has reached a zenith. Every day we see fiction and propaganda described as news, and petty agendas masked as analysis. Yet the great folded cloths of history are the true lenses through which persuasion and even outright fictions are shown to us. There's one man in history that stands out as the most maligned by historians and legend. And even today, his name is synonymous with barbarity and baseness. Could this be because all major accounts of his life, except one, were written by outsiders who didn't know him? Could it be that history just needs enemies to hate and revile? I want to tell you the story of a young boy named Temujin, born on the border of Mongolia and Serbia around 1162 AD. This young boy faced the harshest of youths, yet he went on to become one of history's most notorious figures. Of course, I'm talking about the boy who would later become Genghis Khan, the man who would oversee an empire of over 11 million contiguous square miles. That's bigger than the entirety of Europe. And if you think you can do that with just a sword and a dangerous streak, you may have been reading too much fake history. Temujin, as legend has it, was born with a bright red clot of blood in his hand. This may or may not be true, but the significance of this piece of folklore is that it signifies that he was born to war. And war was something that the man he became excelled at. Yet there's a side to Genghis that has been largely swallowed by historical revisionism. And that's that this fearsome warrior was, in many ways, the first true progressive in history. Here's a few things you may not have known about him. Firstly, he disdained the idea of familial privilege, going against all the traditions of his tribe and nation. He only ever gave position to those that earned it. He even extended this idea to his troops, who previously had fought only in family units. He mixed the people up to create a sense of unity among previously warring tribes, and the natural leaders among these groups were given their due. Something that he really doesn't even get credit for was his insistence on the freedom of worship. Like many of the Mongols, he was himself an animist, but his empire spread so far that naturally he had people from other cultures and religions under his banner. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others, all were welcome and all were free to practice their religion in whatever manner they saw fit. This was long before freedom of religion became a thing almost anywhere else in the world. And if that's not progressive enough for you, he banned the sale and kidnapping of women. He stopped slavery in the Mongol Empire. He developed laws to protect people's property, instituted a writing system, abolished hereditary titles, granted diplomatic immunity to foreign ambassadors, safe conduct, the first postal service, and even began a census. But that is the man he became. That's the Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. I want to talk about the boy, Temujin, and how he became a man. You see, history tells us of his brutality and his empire, but ignores the rest. It ignores those things that make him human, and in many ways a relatable, talented yet troubled soul. Temujin had 6 siblings and lived as part of a nomadic tribe with his mother and father, his father being Usegi, the leader of the tribe, and by all accounts a good warrior and steady hand. At this time, most of the steppe tribes were in a state of low-level warfare, ready to attack or steal from another when the opportunity presented, or to intermarry when new blood was needed. It was a supposedly friendly tribe that poisoned Usegi, leaving the way for jealous rivals within the tribe to take over the group. Now, not wanting to kill the young Temujin or his siblings, possibly because of bad omens, the tribe decided to abandon them. 7 children and their mother alone, without a tribe to defend them, they would be dead soon enough anyway without staining the killer's own hands any worse. And the main advantage here being that they would not have to feed them. It was a brutal time for the family, living off whatever could be hunted or foraged, hiding whenever a stranger came into view, scared of what might happen should a tribe pass their way. But mostly it was hunger, crushing hunger. Part of Temujin's legend is that he killed his older brother, who had been holding back food from the family. We don't know if this is true, but it fits in with the idea that Genghis would never let a slight go unanswered. After a short time passed, his old tribe came back that way. Now that he was an outsider, none of the rules or traditional customs applied, so they captured him and made him a slave. Can you imagine how hard this is for a young boy? First they kill his father, then they abandon him and his family to starve. Then they capture him and make him a slave, the very people he grew up with, those he called his family. We can begin to see where his ideas on rewarding competence over bloodlines came from. Being the fierce and daring boy he was, Temujin escaped and made his way back to his family, knowing now that just a small group alone, they could never be safe from larger groups. So he began to gather other rejected people around him, those who had been cast out of other tribes, those who were in fear or on the run, and he began his own tribe, still a boy, but with a presence that would become legendary. We move on a couple of years, and we see Temujin has a strong group around him. They have enough people to make them difficult targets, and Temujin's own growing reputation as a warrior gives them enough respect among the other tribes that they begin to reach out for trade and marriages. And this is how Temujin came to marry Borte, his first wife, and arguably his life's love. It was something that happened shortly after this marriage that would set him on the course to be the universal ruler who would shape the very world. Still being a small tribe, roving bandits and other tribes was still a major threat, and his wife Borte, she was kidnapped by the former and taken away. Temujin, knowing full well what fate lay in store for her, he set off to get her back, with revenge heavy in his mind. Differing accounts exist of what Temujin did when he caught up with the bandits. All agreed that his revenge was brutal, some suggesting that he was so enraged that the memories of what he did to them haunted him throughout his life, torturing, cutting, eating. And after, he realized that while other tribes existed, those he loved and was responsible for could never truly be safe. He saw only one course before him, to unite all under his own banner. Thus began a period of war, where Temujin cut his teeth on becoming a feared and respected leader. He would reach out to other tribes, form alliances through family or trade, and if they were not willing, through the sword and the bow. If they were not part of his tribe, they were a threat to be dealt with. And as his numbers grew, no one could stand in his way. But it was not through the iron fist alone that he ruled. He examined why the tribes warred with each other. The traditional causes of unrest, he decided to remove them, banning slavery, banning the stealing of women, and destroying the age-old tradition of blood rivalry by grouping his warriors into units of 10, each unit being made up of those from different tribes. Therefore they would rely on each other for their lives and forge bonds of respect and friendship that erased the hereditary system that had first led to so much bloodshed. Those under his Khanate numbered an estimated 1 million people, which may seem a smallish number today, but at the time, outside of China, it was unheard of. The united tribes together, for the first time in history, named him Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. But a question still bothered Genghis. Why was it that before his unification, the Mongol tribes were constantly at war? What was it, other than the need for resources, that kept them fighting? The answer to this question is what led to his conquest and empire building. It became apparent that for many years, the rulers of Xixia, present-day northwest China, had seen the Mongol hordes as a possible threat to their dynasty, and had been sending envoys out to tribes in order to sow dissent with other tribes through bribery or lies, and it created an almost perpetual state of warfare that kept the barbarians focused on each other and away from their own dearly loved borders. Genghis came to the conclusion that as long as there were hostile kingdoms outside of his control, his people would never be free or safe. He began to plot his expansion, and the rest is, as they say, history. So how did such a man become cast in the role of a monster? Yes, he warred and battled, but so did almost every other major leader, yet we don't call Julius Caesar or Napoleon Bonaparte barbarians. The fact is that for hundreds of years after his death, all the accounts of Genghis Khan's life were written by those looking in and judging by a different standard, and from a completely different time. They were writing history based on someone else's interpretation of history, which in turn was based on another. There was a Benedictine monk and chronicler in the 13th century called Matthew Paris, who wrote some of history's most important contemporary accounts of life in Europe during his time. Yet he also turned his hand to writing about Genghis, and he based all of this on second or third or fourth hand accounts, and perhaps with more than a little salt included. He writes of the Mongols that they are, quote, a detestable nation of Satan that poured out like devils from Tartarus, so that they are rightly called Tartars, end quote. Tartarus being an ancient name for hell, it's possible that Paris was indulging in thrilling terms to produce a better read. And from this first, almost contemporary book, it seems the rest of the pack followed suit. When we see media outlets pile on the bandwagon in these present days of the 24-hour news cycle and entertainment, it's often difficult to discern exactly where the stories came from, or what the truth is behind them. It's the rapidity with which these stories spread that helps cover its roots. And the moguls behind the media, they know this only too well. Although Genghis went on to become a dominant force in the world, it's far too easy to ignore that, as Temujin, almost every action he took was to protect his family and those under his care. The present morality does not want a historical character to have real justifications for his actions which were a reaction to oppression and violence. It destroys the narrative that good and wise men rule over you without self-interest. And most of all, when we have these strong characters who come from nowhere and then go on to become the most powerful men in history, it shows that one person, with enough will, enough fortitude, can shape the entire world around them. And that can never be allowed. Thank you for listening to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. Join us next episode, where we'll be talking more history, politics, legends and stories. Until next time, thanks for listening.